Welcome to the English Hour on ANN television. Our guest today is Rabbi Herschel Gluck. His family came to Britain from Central Europe as refugees in 1938 and 39. Rabbi Herschel is an Orthodox rabbi. He was the rabbi of Walford Road Synagogue here in the UK, and he has founded the Muslim-Jewish Forum. He's a great friend, and it's an honor to have him with us. Herschel, well, really it is a great honor to have you with us. I am thrilled that you're here. It must be, I think, the first occasion that we've interviewed a rabbi here on ANN television. And it's an opportunity for us to understand a little more about Judaism and to understand a little bit more about Israel. I really think we can get some progress here today. Your family, of course, your family came to Britain as refugees prior to the Second World War.
Yes.
Just tell us a bit about that. They came on your mother came on the Kinder transport?
My mother was 10 years old when she had to flee Europe. Her family lived in Austria, in southeast Austria, a place called Burgenland. And as soon as Hitler entered the country, they immediately made that whole area Judenrein. In other words, they cleared out all the Jews. And they had been living there for over 500 years. And they were forced into a ghetto in Vienna. And the living situation was terrible. And my mother was on the first Kinder transport out of Vienna in 1938 as a 10-year-old child. That was the last time she saw her parents.
Really, and how tragic. Your father also a refugee in 39.
Yeah, he was studying in the Talmudical college in a yeshiva in Belgium at the time. His parents had already fled to the UK, and they insisted that he join them. He wanted to continue his studies, but they said, no, you have to come over, and thanks God they did.
Oh my goodness. It's quite a point, because I suppose at that time the Jewish population of the world must have been about 12 million or something of that order, and 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust.
It was 18 million and 6 million were killed.
18 million, 6 million killed. Interesting, because what is the Jewish population of the world now? It's
about 14 million.
About 14 million, of whom 6 million live in Israel?
Approximately.
And in a sense, the founding of the State of Israel, although Zionism was around as a concept for a long time, but the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 was a direct consequence of the events of the Second World War, the persecution of the Jews in Europe.
And there were so many displaced Jews, and Jews who felt alienated from the continent, and they didn't know where to go. And of course, many of them felt that the Holy Land was their natural place.
Now, it's understandable. But and in those early days, you did have Jewish philosophers, Martin Buber, for instance, who believed in a one-state solution, who believed that there should be a homeland for the Jews and the Palestinians that was one united state in the Middle East. That is not so prominent as an approach now. There is a different sort of driving force behind.
I don't think anyone in the region looks at that as a realistic prospect for the present in the region. Sadly, over the past 60 years, the situation has generated a lot of hostility between people. And I think that that is a major problem that needs to be addressed.
Tell me something, I mean, this is really going off at a tangent, but just following a thought that comes to my mind. There is the concept, certainly in the Arab world, that the Jewish state has expansionist ideas. And they see the flag of Israel with the two blue stripes as representing the Nile and the Euphrates, as if the Jewish state should somehow span the Middle East. Is that Is that incorrect? Do those two stripes represent the Nile and the Euphrates?
The two stripes actually represent the talis, the prayer shawl, which we use when we pray in the morning. The stripes do not represent the Nile and the Euphrates. I think most people in Israel would be more than happy to live in peace and harmony in the small bit of land that they have at present.
And given, I mean, I do want to talk about Judaism, but I just want to, these things, they're so fascinating. Given the idealism of many Jews, how does that equate with the founding of a state which has a kind of form of many Arabs would view as a kind of apartheid system, where you have Palestinian areas that are governed by Israel as territories, Judea and Samaria and so forth, not assimilated into Israel, but governed by the state of Israel. Is this ethically sound, or is how do you view this?
I certainly wouldn't equate the situation in Israel to apartheid. The Palestinians who live within the pre-67 borders are full citizens of the country. There aren't any special areas for Palestinians. They are part and parcel of the fabric of Israeli society. They vote in elections, they serve in parliament, they serve as diplomats. They are fully part of Israeli society, and there's no no-go areas for the Palestinians who live in Israel. As far as the territories are concerned, Israel didn't want war with Jordan in '67. Israel sent messages to King Hussein saying, we do not want conflict. Please don't get involved in this war. And that's why Israel made such a mess of their battle in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, because they weren't prepared for it. They were dreading it and were hoping and praying that it wouldn't happen. Once it happened, they found themselves in a situation which they haven't managed to disentangle themselves from till this day, for various reasons which we all know. And they have a choice of actually incorporating the West Bank into Israel proper, which is a possibility. But I think most of the Palestinians and most of the world don't want them to do that. So therefore they find themselves in a situation which they are in the West Bank, but at the same time they don't know how to pull out. They want a solution, but it takes two to tango, and the same applies for the Palestinians. They also want a solution, but the question is, how does one achieve a solution given the circumstances?
Now, there is one of the problems, I think, for the Palestinians today is the expectation of Israel, which is higher of the Palestinians than their expectation of any other governments in the world. I mean, there's this expectation that the Palestinians should recognize Israel as a Jewish state. No other nation on earth is asked to do that. Recognizing Israel as a Jewish state for Palestinians is very difficult, because much of the population, up to 20%, I believe, of the population of Israel is Palestinian. And yet this demand, especially by the current government, but it's been around for a while, this demand of the Palestinians that they should recognize Israel as a Jewish state, very unfair, wouldn't you say? I mean,
Israel is a small country and has a very different makeup to most of the countries surrounding it. It is a Jewish state. That's the bottom line. That is what it's about. It's about being a place of refuge where Jews can feel safe, where Jews can live in confidence as Jews. And therefore the concept of it being recognized as such goes to the very heart of what it is, of its identity. And therefore it feels that if it's not recognized as such, it is somehow being alienated from the region, is seen as a foreign body, as an alien construct in the region which doesn't belong there. Whilst in reality, as Jews, we've been in the Holy Land for thousands of years, all the way from the time of Abraham. So therefore, we feel that we're not tourists. We're not there as a foreign body which has nowhere else to go. This is where we belong ultimately.
But if you're going to belong there, you have to have a peace process, and that requires leadership from Israel. In effect, if you take the South African equation, we are looking for an Israeli de Klerk, and we don't see one. We haven't had an Israeli leader, apart from possibly Rabin, who had that kind of vision for peace.
I think Shimon Peres is very much a person for peace, and I think there have been many Israelis over the years who have really put their neck out to find a way forward, but it's been extremely difficult. I mean, as it's not just in Israel where it's difficult in the Middle East. Look at Lebanon, look at Iraq, look at Egypt. I mean, the Middle East is a place where it's very difficult to find solutions to very real, substantial problems. And close at home, let's look at Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, you have two communities, the Catholic community, the Protestant community, and to this day, despite the Good Friday Agreement, there is a very difficult and long road to find peace and harmony between these two communities.
So, we want a peace process. We both feel, the whole world feels, that they'd like to see a peace process in the Middle East. The key issues are, I guess, the right of return for refugees. The status of Jerusalem is possibly the most intractable issue, or is perceived as the most intractable issues. What do you perceive, or what is your view of how that should go, the status of Jerusalem?
The status of Jerusalem, as we've
been
we've speaking for a number of decades, we've been speaking about Jerusalem and to find a way forward. And it's very difficult to find a way forward that will satisfy or to be acceptable to all sides. I mean,
But having said that, I mean, do you feel the concept, you do need one capital for both nations, don't you? I mean, you would recognize that. So Jerusalem has to be the capital of any Palestinian state, just as it has to be the capital of Israel ultimately.
But I don't think it's going to work. I mean, I think we've been speaking about a way forward for so long, and we've put so much energy and so much effort and so much time and so much sweat and heart into this issue. And as I've said before, I think very often we put the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, rather.
But unless we deal with Jerusalem, we're not going to. I mean, it is that one issue that if that were resolved, the rest of the peace process would be, well, easy compared, relatively easy. That one key issue is at heart the problem. Shared sovereignty is, in religious terms, a possibility. I mean, I know that because you've said that. There is. I shouldn't hold your words against you, but there is the concept in a marriage, is there not, that a husband and wife can own the same property in Judaism. So shared sovereignty is not an anathema from a religious point of view.
I mean, Jerusalem for Jews is a very holy city. It goes to the very heart of the Jewish experience. All our prayers, we pray 3 times regular day, 4 times on Saturday, 5 times on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. And wherever we are in the world, we face in the direction of Jerusalem, because we believe all our prayers ascend to God from Jerusalem because of its innate holiness.
But it's also extremely holy to, well, it's extremely holy to Christians, but more important and relevant to this conversation, it's extremely holy to Muslims. And the concept of the sacredness of Jerusalem is seminal to these three major religions. The idea that a Palestinian state would not have Jerusalem as its capital is really difficult. I mean, what about the concept of if you view Jerusalem like an onion and you peel off the layers, if you deal with the issue separately, so you deal with security and you say this can be dealt that way, you deal with municipal issues, you can say these can be dealt with that way. I mean, once you look at the different issues separately, then sovereignty surely is not such a problem with regard to a city that has both Palestinian and Jewish residents.
I mean, Israel never wanted to conquer East Jerusalem. But once we have this city, once Israel has this city, it's very, very difficult, to put it mildly, to withdraw from Jerusalem because of its very special place in the Jewish heart.
But nobody's asking Israel to withdraw from Jerusalem or Israel not to have Jerusalem as its capital, although in international law, actually, Jerusalem is a corpus separatum. We still are in a situation where it's a unique issue, and which is why the embassies of the world had not moved to Jerusalem, despite the fact that Israel's parliament is in Jerusalem. But the point being, we need to address this issue. It's key, and if we want peace between Israel and the Arab world, we can't really do it without addressing the Jerusalem issue, can we? I mean, nobody's asking Israel to give up Jerusalem as its capital, but they're just expecting Palestine to take on some of the, to have it as its heart. Surely that's fair.
I mean, I think that most people in Israel would not agree to any part of Jerusalem being ceded to the Palestinian Authority because of its unique place in the life, in the emotions, in the sentiments of the Jewish people.
But they would agree to Jerusalem being the sovereign capital of the Palestinian state? I mean, presumably.
I don't think so. I don't think that the majority would agree to that.
The key issue, I think it's probably, in my view, it is the key issue in terms of the peace process. Unless we deal with this one issue, I don't think we're going to see peace between Israel and the Arab world. And that's why I think it's so important. I mean,
I think a lot is based on a lack of trust, because prior to the Six-Day War, Jews didn't have any access to the Jewish holy sites
no, I appreciate
in Jerusalem. Jews were not allowed to enter and pray at the Western Wall, and therefore that has generated a lack of trust and a feeling that unless Israel has sovereignty over the whole city, there will be a return to the bad old days.
But nobody's saying Israel doesn't have, well, some may, but I'm certainly, from my perspective, I'm not saying Israel shouldn't have sovereignty over Jerusalem. I'm saying that the Palestinians should have the right to have it as their capital city as well, to have their, to call Jerusalem their, their city. After all, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is there, the Dome of the Rock. It is sacred to Palestinians as well as to Jews.
But I mean, the sad thing is that the Palestinians haven't recognized that the Temple Mount is the Temple Mount.
Oh, no. That's a minority.
Good, but sadly, that minority's voice has been.
I don't think so. I think Palestinians recognize history. I don't think that's, in my view. I mean, you may be talking about a small group of extremists, but by and large.
But they're not just extremists. I mean, I've met religious leaders from the Palestinian community, who've come up with ridiculous attitudes regarding the Temple Mount and the connection of the Jewish people with the Temple Mount.
Well, I would think that was hopefully an unusual perspective, but. Having said that, it is currently the most sacred place for Muslims. Mm-hmm. Currently, it has become. I mean, it is after Mecca.
Mm-hmm. After Mecca, Medina, third holiest place.
Absolutely, and it's very fundamentally important to Palestinians. Mm-hmm. Let's. Just out of curiosity, because we don't want to spend the whole discussion talking about Jerusalem, although I think it is vitally important. Mm-hmm. But presumably the Golan Heights do not have quite the same resonance. I mean, they are up to a point negotiable.
Yeah, but the question now, who to negotiate with whom?
So we've talked about Jerusalem. I'm not happy, but I'm not sure our audience will be happy. But having said that, let's just talk about the Golan Heights. Mm-hmm. This is key, certainly, and I appreciate that Syria is in disarray.
Sadly, very sadly.
It's a tragedy what's happening. But nonetheless, the Golan Heights, there is not presumably the same kind of, what we would call it. It is negotiable. If there was somebody to negotiate with, it's negotiable, the Golan Heights.
But I mean, we have tried to find a way forward on the Golan Heights, and in better times than now. I would say that the chances now have fallen quite drastically of finding a solution when Syria itself is in such a tragic mess.
I appreciate that, but in principle. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just assume for a moment that you had a secular government in Syria that was willing to re-enter and re-engage on the peace process, a comprehensive peace process as envisioned by the Arab Plan, what used to be called the Abdullah Plan. Then there is surely a possibility that the Golan Heights is not as intractable an issue as the status of Jerusalem. Is that right?
Yes, but there, of course, the Golan Heights is very important for security because it has commanding views over a very large part of Israel, and Israel has been prepared to negotiate on the Golan Heights, as we know, but I mean, Syria was quite intractable for most of the time regarding what it would agree to.
I mean, there was almost an agreement under Clinton,
but it didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and that was not Syria's fault. That was very close to a deal, and then the goalposts were changed.
As we know, I mean, Assad the father was prepared to compromise on the Golan Heights, and I think the plan that he suggested, Israel was quite happy with, but then that changed.
Yeah, but it changed. You had a very near deal, and then it changed because the Israelis and the Americans. I mean, Assad was brought to Geneva, I think it was at the time, for a deal, and it wasn't exactly his fault that the thing fell through. I mean, the position was changed. I mean, the position of the American-Israel position on the Heights, but nonetheless, history aside, we don't look backwards.
But I certainly don't think that in today, by any stretch of the imagination, that in today's reality, there is a possibility of a change of status in the Golan, considering what is happening in Syria. And I think that one would have to be totally mad to agree to a change in the present time.
I appreciate that, but one would hope that we will have some stability in Syria, and
Inshallah.
And then one would assume that the Golan is negotiable. You will at least concede that.
I see that you're even a greater optimist than I thought, William.
No. I don't see that as impossible.
Not impossible, but at the moment, the situation is very much a stalemate.
You don't use that as an excuse for avoiding the question.
I think we're talking as realists here. We're not talking as dreamers. And the reality in Syria at the moment, it leaves not just a lot to be hoped for. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the Syrian people, and it's a tragedy for the whole region.
Now, does this, coming on to that, this presumably, this is a tragedy that has come with great benefits for Israel.
Israel certainly is very upset about the situation in Syria. It's certainly not something that Israel wanted or desired. Quite the contrary. The total chaos and anarchy that exists in Syria today is a disaster for Israel and a disaster for the whole region.
But Syria giving up its chemical weapons is a great plus for Israel.
But Israel and Syria had basically been in peace since '73, since the Yom Kippur War.
It was one of those big fears that Israelis had.
It was a fear, but the possibility of war with Syria was extremely unlikely.
But Israelis must be grateful that the chemical weapons threat, it has been the big plus for Israel out of this thing, out of this tragedy, isn't it? Right?
I think the Syrian people are the great winners here about the chemical weapons being taken out of the equation, because they were the ones who were suffering under the cloud of chemical weapons.
Yeah, well, there's a mute point as to who was responsible for the...
we're not going there, but certainly it was between the combatants. And certainly taking out the chemical weapons is a great blessing for all the Syrian people.
And for Israel.
For Israel as well, of course, and for the whole region. And I think anyone in the Middle East is happier with less chemical weapons in the region than more chemical weapons in the region.
I would definitely concede that. I think we need a weapons of mass destruction free Middle East. I would hope that Israel would take a lead too in these matters. But you're not an Israeli. You're a Brit. Let's talk about. Still, I turn to you for these issues because you do understand them. We talked a little. I think it's very interesting to understand Israeli politics. I've always thought of it as upside down to the rest of the world, whereas in the rest of the world, if you like, the people, the masses are the left wing. The establishment tends to be the right wing. In Israel, because of the nature of the State of Israel, which was founded by refugees, many of whom came from communist regimes and so on in the aftermath of the Second World War. Many of those refugees were socialist in complexion. They became the establishment and the Labour Party, the government in Israel for many years. And the new refugees now from countries like Russia resent the left-wing approach, and so you get the radical element in Israeli politics, the element of the the workers, if you like, is right-wing. It's the masses are right-wing, the establishment, the elite is left-wing. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And that is completely, well, quite unique in politics in the world today, I would say. And so we have a populist government now with Netanyahu, which is quite right-wing in complexion. Nonetheless, the left wing have always failed, the Labour Party have always failed in any peace process. The peace processes, such as they've been, have been right-wing led, haven't they, in Israel? Presumably because the right wing has the confidence which the left wing lacks. The peaceniks don't deliver peace in Israel. Would that be fair to say?
Yep.
So we can hope for something, even from Netanyahu. I mean, would you regard him as a lost cause, or?
No, I don't consider him a lost cause, and I think that the people of Israel honestly, deeply, profoundly want peace. They want to live in peace with their neighbors. They want to live in peace with the Arabs and with the Muslims and with the Christians and all the different people who make up the complexity of the region, of the Middle East. Israel wants to live in peace with its neighbors. And I see when Israelis and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians meet on a one-to-one level, there is a very positive vibe. There's a very positive interaction. So therefore we see that peace is possible. There are those who say that there is a genetic issue between Israelis and the Arab world, or between the Arab world and Israelis. That's a lie. That isn't true. There is the potential for peace, but we need to find a way how to achieve it. But I would say there's a majority in both camps who really want peace. But sadly, the region has created this myth of dehumanizing the other, of not seeing the other as the other really is. And I think that is the real task that we are faced with, is to find a way how both people can manage to look beyond the pain, the suffering, the hurt, which is there on both sides. And I know it's very difficult to achieve that, because each one feels that, look at my pain, look at what I have suffered, look at what my family has suffered. And there has been tremendous suffering in the region. And the way forward can only be to find a way how we can manage to go beyond that. And the question, why should we go beyond that? Because if we don't go beyond that, that will generate more pain and suffering in the future, which none of us want. What do we want? We want to be able to bring up our children in a safe, peaceful, harmonious region where the whole region can be prosperous and it can bring benefit to all the people in the region.
I think that's powerfully said. I think perhaps one of the problems of American-led peace processes is that they've tended to be bilateral. They've tended to be, in all the recent years, they've tended to be peace processes between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And in a way, that's partly Israel's fault, because it has enjoyed bilateral peace negotiations with Egypt and with Jordan, and it thinks it's the way to go. But I think actually what we really need now is a comprehensive peace process, as envisioned by the Arab plan, which means negotiations with the entire Arab world. I mean, I would say, or would you echo that? Or?
I would say that Israelis and Palestinians have a very special issue. They have a lot in common. People look at Israelis and Palestinians as two groups who cannot find a way forward. I disagree with that, and I disagree because I've had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with many Palestinians.
But bilateral negotiations tend to fail, and they tend to fail because Palestine is the weaker party, and as the weaker party it has one great power, which is the power to say no, and it exercises that power. So we have stalled and stalled, and obviously Israel on many occasions says no also, don't get me wrong, but the point is that we're going nowhere, whereas if you had negotiations on a comprehensive peace process, we might see some progress. And we couldn't, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the whole apple at once. You could have the phased introduction of the Abdullah plan, the Arab plan. You could go in stages. Nobody envisages a perfect tomorrow, but this idea of going on with the stop-start Palestine-Israel, 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 with America sitting there like some Qadi, some judge, and things going nowhere. I think it is time for new thinking on peace, wouldn't you say?
I think there's certainly time for new thinking on peace, but I think what we need primarily is a better level of civil life in the region. In other words, that Israelis and Palestinians, whilst we are different peoples, and whilst we are separate, but I think there's been a breakdown in appreciating the humanity of the other. And I think that without that, we will continue, God forbid, for decades of conflict and violence and not overcome the basic problem, which is being able to see the other person as human, being able to trust the other, being able to feel that the other can be a partner in the region.
Interesting. I mean, just pursuing that point a moment, because it's an interesting one, and I think some of our listeners wouldn't be aware, or at least not all of them would be aware, that when we talk of the people of the book, I mean that the stories from the Quran, the stories of Moses, of the flood, of I mean all of
Jonah.
Yeah, exactly. Are there in the Hebrew scriptures in exactly the same way. The historical stories, the major historical stories, are precisely the same, with one perhaps curious exception, which is the great sacrifice, where.
But I think in the Quran it's not. In the Quran it's not clearly stated. In the Torah or in the Bible, of course, it's stated that Abraham took Isaac. But I understand that in the Quran it's not clear.
Well, we'll have our listeners coming back on this. But my reading of the Quran, it does say that Ishmael was the one who was taken. And the other minor difference, I'm going to have to go back and read the Quran myself. But the other minor difference is that I believe the animal that's for the sacrifice in the Hebrew scriptures is a ram,
yes,
and in the Quran I believe it's a goat. But I'm going to be, if I've got this wrong, we're going to have people coming back on us at ANN. But basically, apart from this detail, which is an interesting detail,
yes,
apart from this detail, the scriptures are completely harmonious. The Jewish scriptures or the Judeo-Christian scriptures, because we also take them.
And it's very interesting, of course, also about the connection of the Jewish people to the Holy Land, which the Quran clearly speaks about. And I think that sadly many people in the Arab world are not aware of, that the Quran clearly states the connection between the Jewish people and the Holy Land.
No, I respect that. So we have the scriptures, and the Judaism then has other books that are just as Islam has other books. I mean, Islam has then the Hadith and the other supporting books. Judaism has the Psalms and
the Muslims also have the Psalms, I understand. Speaking to Muslim friends of mine.
Well, they respect them
Yes.
as scriptures. Yes, that's true. But Judaism has also a body of oral law that it takes very seriously. And that perhaps does, in some senses, separate it from Islam.
But a lot of the stories in Islam are taken from the Jewish oral law, from the Talmud, from Midrashim. A lot of it is incorporated in the Quran and in the Hadith. I mean, they drew very strongly because the Talmud was written down in about 500 in the Common Era, which was long before Muhammad. And therefore Muhammad was very deeply influenced by a lot of the material from the oral law.
Well, Muslims would say Islam, it was the faith that in its day was Judaism and then Christianity and then Islam. So the Muslim sense of a continuous tradition is there, which is why Muslims call Jews people of the book. Of course, your interpretation of the oral law is rather more severe than Christian or Muslim, or at least than many Christians and Muslims. I suppose there are some Shiite ayatollahs that would take quite a strong line as well.
Because you can't, Judaism without the oral law isn't Judaism. Because it's only because the oral law is what gives sense, which gives meaning to the Torah. Because in other words, we believe that when God gave the Torah, He gave it part written and part oral. In other words, that the oral part is just as legitimate, is just as important as the written Torah. In other words, that they're two halves of one whole, that the whole can only be understood through the written and the oral.
But some of your more extreme beliefs come from the oral law. For instance, not touching a woman.
No, I mean, no. I would say that everything that you can be found in the oral is found in the written, and everything found in the written is found in the oral. They're not two separate issues. They are one and the same.
Interesting. Yeah. The Judaism, of course, is split in the Western world between the Orthodox and the Reform, if you like. The rest, that split is very severe. The Orthodox very often won't sit, Orthodox rabbis won't sit to discuss things with Reform rabbis. Perhaps more extreme than we see between Shiite and Sunni in Islam, or between Protestant and Catholic in Christianity. It is a radical split. I mean, this must sadden people like yourself.
Of course. I mean, it's very sad that that there are such differences, and I certainly want constructive change in the Jewish people, that we should be able to should be able to be one people under one God and the one Torah, that we should be able to look to the future together. Of course, I don't see this happening overnight, but if it does, I'd be very happy about it.
And you are united in your belief with the Muslims in the coming of the Messiah. You're looking well, actually the Muslims, like the Christians, regard Christ as the Messiah, although they give a special place to the Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet, and to whom the Quran was given. You're looking for, not for the second coming of the Messiah, but you're waiting still for the Messiah.
Yes.
And this, again, is one of the issues that sets you apart from Muslims and Christians. You're hopeful.
We're very hopeful.
I hope.
We've been hopeful for many years, and we continue to be hopeful.
Okay.
And we see the importance of the coming of Mashiach as being so important. I mean, there are many people in the 19th century who felt and hoped that the Enlightenment, that science would change the world for the better, that this would be a type of a secular Messiah. Sadly, that didn't happen. And we need a real and proper Mashiach who will change the world for good.
Do you believe in secular governance? You believe in the separation of faith and politics? I mean, up to a point?
Up to a point.
Yeah. And you hope for, I mean, you say you're hoping for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. But you see Israel as a Jewish state, a homeland for the Jews. Is it essentially, or does it have to be? It is a secular state, isn't it, Israel?
Yes. And
you would celebrate that. You would not expect it to be anything else. I mean, you don't expect it to be when you want Israel as a homeland for the Jewish people. You're not one of those that rejects the Palestinians within Israel.
Well, no, of course I don't reject the Palestinians within Israel. And Israel doesn't reject the Palestinians within Israel. Quite the contrary, the Palestinians are celebrated as being a very important and integral part of Israeli society.
Interesting. Yes, so where do we go from here, Herschel? I mean, if we're going to, we have a stalled peace process at the moment. The Americans, their attention span is limited. They seem to have given up on, they've given up on the Israel-Palestine talks. They've given up on Syrian talks because they're suddenly attracted by a new Cold War with Russia, and that's the big thing of the moment. It's a shame that the Western world has such limited attention. But do you hope for a renewal of the peace process? Do you think it's possible at this time?
As I said earlier, I think that whilst I respect America and I appreciate America's concern for the Middle East, I think the way forward has to be amongst the people of the region themselves, that the people in the region have to find a way together to find a way forward. It shouldn't be that this is imposed from without, that America sets the agenda. We have to realize that we are neighbors, that we are the people who suffer in the region. All of us suffer in the region. And we have to find a way that this region, with its great blessings, should be a place where we can live harmoniously, where we can live in peace, where we can cooperate for the benefit of the future of our peoples.
And I mean, we've needed a peace broker up till now. We haven't seemed to be able to, negotiations haven't taken place without a peace broker. You're saying that it is the American role is not vital, that we could and should manage?
I think the concept that you have to have America involved is undermining the future for the peoples, because it sounds like this is something imposed from without. I think this has to come from within. And I think this, going back what you said before about the recognition of a Jewish state, that when the Arab neighbors recognize that the Jews have a right to be here, have a right to stay, are an integral part of the region. So that is what's required to look forward.
But there is a huge difference, a yawning gulf between saying the Jews have an integral part. I mean, most Palestinians, even within Gaza, would say Jews have a right to be here. I'm not saying all, but many and if not, I would genuinely say most, including many key Hamas members, would say Jews have a right to be here. What they wouldn't say, what they find it very difficult to say, is that Israel is a Jewish state, and that's because
why would they find it difficult to say Israel is a Jewish state?
Because Israel has, as part of its population, within its existing boundaries, population that is 1 in 5 Palestinians.
Sure, but that isn't a contradiction.
It is a contradiction
because Israel sees its Palestinian citizens as part of the state, and
as equal.
As equal,
well,
yes.
then it's a Jewish and Palestinian state. I mean, to say it is a uniquely Jewish state is to disavow their right to exist as citizens of Israel.
No, they are equal citizens.
Then you don't have to. Then surely it's wrong to ask for this extra. To say that Israel's a Jewish state,
I mean,
Israel is a homeland for the Jews.
It's like you're saying that a number of Arab states are called the Arab Republic, even though there are people who aren't Arabs there.
Absolutely.
But it's still an Arab Republic, and one can appreciate that. So this little state of Israel wants to see itself as the Jewish state of Israel.
Now, I would say, actually, interestingly enough, I would say in terms of nations that have substantial minorities, like Syria, then I think in those instances, it should not be the Syrian Arab Republic, because it disavows the heritage of, for example, the Kurds and others that are part of Syria. This is a personal opinion, mind you, and many of the listeners to ANN may disagree with me, but that's my perspective. And in a similar sense, I really don't think it's right to ask the Palestinians to call Israel a Jewish state. We've been talking a lot about politics, and the Middle East has been riven with war. Riven with wars, tragic wars between Israel and the Arab world. It's been riven with, it's currently, the Arab Spring is in some senses enheartening, but in other senses it's tragic what's happening. We have civil war. We almost have a war between Shiite and Sunni Islam, with the fault line between running across Syria and Lebanon, down through Iraq and down to Bahrain. Can we hope for a day when we see an end to war? Are you essentially, you're a man of the cloth, as they say in the West. You're a religious man. Are you a pacifist in your underlying approach to life? How do you see things?
How do you define a pacifist?
A pacifist in my book is somebody who would not fight in normal circumstances, who would look to talk for peace and negotiation, and who would avoid war almost at any cost. I think war has too often been a first resort rather than a last resort in the Middle East.
I think that, as you know, that I've toiled and sweated and put myself at risk in order to find a peaceful way forward, in order to search and to try to find how Jews and Arabs can live in peace and harmony in the region. I do believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. I do believe that Israel needs to be concerned about its security, and it needs to be very concerned about its security. But at the same time, we need to continue to work and to toil to find a peaceful way forward. Not just peace in the abstract, not just peace between countries, but most importantly, peace between people. Peace between the Jewish people and Arab nation. Peace between Jews and Muslims. peace between Jews and Christians. That we have to find a way that all this needless hatred and conflict, which has no positive outcome for anyone, we're all suffering equally in the Middle East. We have to realize that the Middle East is blessed, not just blessed with oil. I think that is secondary, oil and gas. It's blessed with its people. The people in the Middle East are intelligent, are warm, are caring, are passionate about their families, passionate about their pride as civilized human beings. But all this conflict is undermining the future in the Middle East. It's undermining the future for the children in the Middle East, for the future in the Middle East. And that is what we have to do. We have to come to our senses. We have to think, okay, you know, everyone has a lot of complaints about the past. A lot of people are upset about the present. But what are we doing that the future should be different than the past and the present? What are we doing to make sure that the future should be a constructive future, a prosperous future, a peaceful future for all of us?
Bless you, Herschel. I mean, I do hope that ethos does come through in terms of the negotiators. That's wonderful what you've just said. The trouble is that when people sit down to negotiate, as one wise Jewish man once said to me, when people sit down to negotiate, they think they're still on the battlefield and they try and negotiate to their maximum advantage instead of trying to negotiate a solution which would actually help both parties and would help their children and would help the future. But God grant that we will see a better peace in the Middle East, and right quickly, because we need one. Herschel, thank you very much for being our guest today on ANN Television. Thank you.